Hello, and welcome to this codechallenge.dev architecture overview. This is going to be a general overview of the architecture behind and the code behind codechallenge.dev. But of course, it's no substitute for diving in and trying to make changes yourself. Hopefully, this can give you a little context, though, before doing so. But remember, have a low level of shame and iterate quickly once you find something that you want to change or fix. I've divided this into three parts: the user interface and front-end usage of the system, the code behind the interface, and finally, the infrastructure itself. First, let's take a look at the front end. This site is hosted at codechallenge.dev. There's also a documentation site hosted at, here we go, oops, hold on, just right here. Not to capture, docs.codechallenge.dev. So to log into the Code Challenge, all you need is a GitLab.com user account, and you can log in. Most users will log in just to participate in challenges, but you can also, log in to create challenges, right? So I was already logged into GitLab.com, and so it logged me right in. Otherwise, it would prompt me to log in or create a new user. Now, to create a new challenge, I can click Create Challenge right here. I can give my challenge a name and a description that will be publicly available. You can also, or should also rather, choose a short name. This will be used in a short URL for joining, and we'll make that kind of more meaningful. To feature the challenge on the main homepage, you can use the Feature on Homepage checkbox here. This will feature the most recent challenge only. So when setting up for a new conference, you should be sure to edit the previous challenge and uncheck the featured flag before then making sure you're featuring the challenge that you want. That will show the challenge on the homepage. Lastly, you'll need two additional links to create the challenge. First, you'll need the GitLab project on gitlab.com that's going to be used for the challenge. This is the project that folks will fork, and we will use the GitLab API to check on completion. Then you also need a handbook link to the rules and terms for this challenge, which ensures folks joining agree to those terms. Once the challenge has been created, you'll see that under My Challenges, and other users will be able to see that under active challenges or going to that sign up link. That short link would be codechallenge.dev/J for join / the short name you gave it in that step. So for this example, for KubeCon, the URL was codechallenge.dev/J/KubeCon-NA22. Now, in the challenge page, you can see the number of entrants and those who have completed each level. When you have a new challenge, it'll start off, of course, with no levels, and you can add a new level by clicking Add New Level here. Each level needs a title and a description, kind of like the challenge. Include any links to relevant documentation or more detailed instructions there. And then next, you'll need to select the type. The two working types currently are merge request and manually verified, although those are planned types here. Then you'll need a level number like 1, 2, or 3. The merge request type can then also have elements like must contain. So this would be for a string that has to be contained in the changes from the merge request, or must be after, which would be a hash that says this merge request must be after this certain commit in order to count. To learn more about this, you can see the documentation on docs.codechallenge.dev, and I would definitely use previous challenges as an example. On the challenge page, you also get a settings button to be able to modify those items, such as featuring the challenge or changing the description, all those things we made when we created it right here. Then on the details page, you can see all of the entrants from a challenge. On this page, you can also manually verify the completion of a given challenge by clicking this and adding a link if applicable and clicking Add. You can also rerun the manual checks by clicking, or the automated checks rather, by clicking Update Scoring. And you can also promote folks to be an admin on the challenge by editing them and saying, well, that person's already an admin, editing and saying make admin. And then finally, you can also view the, or get the link for the leaderboard. And so that leaderboard will then show you the folks who have completed the challenge either by the time that they completed the challenge, like the most recent, or by the level of completion. And then that board's set up to automatically refresh every 30 seconds, but you can adjust those settings, how often it refreshes, and if it's refreshing at all right here. This is because they'll be remembered by this browser actually, and that's because the leaderboard is designed to be on a large TV or monitor at a booth or a trade show. All right, next, let's take a look at the code behind codechallenge.dev. And I'm going to just stop sharing and then share again just to make sure we're seeing the right thing. And you should see my desktop. And now that, great. So the Code Challenge is a Node.js application that uses traditional Node.js server-side patterns for using templates written in the handlebars syntax to then generate the pages server-side. The main app that runs when we're running, npm start is in bin www. And you can see that'll start a server on the specified port or port 3000 for local development. And that then uses the app.js file for the root, right? And so that file is pretty close to vanilla, but it does a couple things. It brings in some required libraries for connecting to Slack and to GitLab and doing a few other things. It registers a number of handlebars helpers that we're going to use to manipulate data in that those handlebar templates. And then it sets the view engine as a handlebars. And then it's pretty vanilla as well from there. For routes, we divided those into several folders here under routes, kind of by logical section. They're mostly public routes, but then all of the routes under this app area, if we look at the index page there, are protected by this requires auth function from the Express OpenID Connect library. And that's the library we're using to connect through OpenID Connect to GitLab.com. The app section then repeats that pattern of having folders for, or separate files rather, for routes. And so you can see the different routes in here. For an example route, let's look at that challenge homepage that we were just looking at, right? And so that route is, typical of the pattern we see for server-side rendering and routing here. It's at /challenge/ID. So the URL, full URL for that page is /app/challenge/the number, where that number is the ID of the challenge and the database ID there. In the code there, we get that ID from the URL, right, the parameters here, and then use the database module to get various information about that challenge from the database. Using that data and doing a little bit of a transformation on it, we then send it to the renderer with the app/challenge template and all that data. So all those templates are stored under the views folder, and in this case under views app challenge.hbs, and this is the template that then uses all that data we just sent it to decide, what to display to the user. Next, let's look at the database module that I mentioned briefly. So you can see here, it's under the DB folder, and then separated into different files and folders for each of the models. For more information on the database, definitely check out the database.md file. But as an example, let's look at that challenges controller that we were calling from the other place, from the template side. So here we have the get all, get details by user ID, get by ID for a single challenge, and then various other functions for creating challenges and updating challenges here. But if we look at, for instance, the get by ID section, we're not just getting, from the challenges database, we're also joining together some other information for this model, including the details of the GitLab project that's involved for this challenge. So that's the kind of overview of the database module. And then other folders here include the lib folder, which has library functions like the calculation of scores, those helpers for handlebars that we saw earlier, and other common functions that are used in more than one place. We've factored outside into here. We also have a public folder. That's where static assets like images are served by the Node application. We use Sass for CSS generation, and that's created here. And then there's also this docs folder that contains an entire Apollo project, kind of separate from this one, but that's where all the documentation lives. You also see this data directory that has a couple of JSON files in it. And you'll see some mentions in the code of a standalone mode. This is an unfinished mode that would have allowed for offline static data to run somewhere disconnected from the internet. This requirement never really materialized in real life, so we haven't finished that feature. Okay, so while that's a high-level overview, hopefully it gives you some context when looking at the code. Of note, to run locally, there are several things you'll need, including Postgres and some environmental variables for things like connecting to the GitLab API and a couple other items. Those required variables are all covered in detail, both in the next section about production infrastructure and the file we'll look at there. All right, then lastly, let's take a look at that production infrastructure file that I mentioned. So the production applications run in GCP within the group community project. You can see detailed information about the architecture and the various pieces in the architecture.md file, which we're going to pull up and use to talk through this. So at the top, you can see a diagram of the various pieces involved. First, let's take a look at the kind of simpler side, the docs site. Requests for docs.codechallenge.dev have their DNS routed through GCP Cloud DNS to the GitLab pages for this project here. And that's deployed from the GitLab CI YAML from that docs subfolder that we saw. That's all written in Astro using Markdown. For codechallenge.dev, that DNS instead points to the GCP app engine for the group community project in GCP. This engine has a running copy or multiple copies of the Node.js app we were just looking at. That app connects to a Postgres database in GCP Cloud SQL for all of the data needs. It also connects through OAuth OpenID Connect to GitLab.com for sign-in, as well as to the GitLab API to check for level completion. For App Engine, there are a number of variables that I mentioned earlier, secrets that are required. Those are included in an app.yaml file that's not checked into Git. This file is stored as a base64 encoded variable in the project deployment variable in the CI/CD variables for deployment of the project. It's also in the marketing 1Password secure note. There are also variables for the connection to SQL. There's also a cron.yaml file that is checked into Git that's used to run Cloud Run tasks every 5 minutes to check the scores, also deployed from GitLab CI/CD. And then finally note that the service user that's used for that CI/CD deployment is pretty critical and also has its authorization file that would be a JSON file from GCP stored as a base64 string in another protected GitLab CI/CD variable. I hope this overview has been useful, but remember, don't be afraid to experiment. The project was a lot of fun to build, but you'll note from this presentation and from the issues list in GitLab on the project that there's plenty that can be done to improve the project and make it even more valuable. Remember, everyone can contribute. Thanks.